Kandoro was one of those old African towns that seemed untouched by haste. The earth there was red and patient, cracked only by the seasons, and the sun rose each morning like a familiar elder who knew every face it warmed. The people of Kandoro lived by rhythm rather than urgency, planting when the land asked for seeds, harvesting when the wind softened, and resting when the moon grew fat in the sky. Evenings were sacred. Fires were lit, stories were shared, and wisdom passed quietly from wrinkled lips to listening ears. In Kandoro, people believed that life was a balance, not a race. Every blessing had its weight, every desire its shadow. The elders often said that nothing followed a person more faithfully than his shadow, because it carried not just his shape but his truth. Children learned early to greet the sunrise with gratitude and to walk humbly under its light, for the sun, they said, revealed more than it hid. Baku was born into this town and grew within its customs, yet his heart never fully rested in them. He was not a poor man, and this truth made his dissatisfaction harder to explain. His farm yielded enough grain to feed his household through the year. His wife, Amara, was steady and kind, known in the market for her fairness and calm words. His children were healthy, their laughter often echoing through the compound at dusk. Among the villagers, Baku was respected. People greeted him by name, invited him to gatherings, and trusted him with responsibilities during communal work. By all visible measures, Baku was fortunate. But inside him lived a quiet hunger that never seemed to be fed. When he watched traders return from distant towns with heavy coins and bright fabrics, his chest tightened. When he heard stories of men whose names traveled farther than their footsteps, envy crept into his thoughts. He began to feel as though life had stopped just short of giving him what he truly deserved. As the seasons passed, that feeling grew sharper. Baku started measuring his life not by what he had, but by what others possessed. He noticed the size of other men's homes, the respect they commanded, the way people leaned in when they spoke. At night, while his family slept, Baku lay awake counting imagined losses instead of real blessings. The elders' teachings, once comforting, began to irritate him. When they spoke of patience, he heard delay. When they spoke of contentment, he heard weakness. During one gathering, an old man warned the youth, "The man who reaches beyond his portion may lose even what was meant for him." Baku smiled politely, but inside he dismissed the words as relics of a slower age. He believed that wisdom without ambition was just fear dressed in tradition. What he did not say aloud was that he felt unseen by fate itself, as though the world had quietly skipped over his name while handing out greatness. One evening, as the sun fell low and stretched long shadows across the ground, Baku walked alone beyond the edge of the village. The air was heavy, and the cicadas sang with restless urgency. As he moved, he noticed his shadow ahead of him, dark and sharp against the red earth. For a moment, it seemed to hesitate while he kept walking, as if unsure whether to follow. Baku stopped, and the shadow stopped too, snapping back into place. The moment passed, but an unease lingered in his chest. He told himself it was nothing, just light and angle, nothing more. Still, as he continued toward the path that led into the trees, his thoughts grew louder. He wondered what it would take to finally feel satisfied, to feel chosen. He did not yet know that dissatisfaction was already leading him somewhere, or that the shadow stretching behind him was listening more closely than he was. Under the fading sun of Kandoro, Baku stepped forward, unaware that he was about to test a boundary his people had warned against for generations. Under the fading sun of Kandoro, Baku stepped forward, unaware that he was about to test a boundary his people had warned against for generations. The path ahead narrowed as it entered the jungle, where the air grew cooler and the light thinned into long, broken lines between the trees. This was not a place villagers visited without reason. The jungle was respected, not feared, but it was known to remember those who entered it with restless hearts. As Baku walked deeper, the sounds of Kandoro faded behind him, the laughter, the fires, the familiar rhythm of life. In their place rose the hush of leaves, the low murmur of unseen creatures, and the steady thud of his own footsteps. His thoughts grew louder in the silence. He told himself he was only walking to clear his mind, yet his feet carried him farther than he intended. Each step felt deliberate, as if some unspoken question was pulling him forward. The light dimmed quickly, and dusk settled like a held breath. That was when Baku noticed he was no longer alone. Ahead, beneath a wide baobab tree whose roots twisted like ancient fingers, stood a man he had never seen before. The stranger stranger was tall, wrapped in dark cloth, his face hidden behind a carved wooden mask that reflected no expression. He did not move as Baku approached, nor did he turn away. He simply waited, as though this meeting had been arranged long before Baku ever chose the path. Baku felt a flicker of unease but pushed it aside. He had spoken to traders from distant lands and men who carried danger in their eyes. He would not be shaken by silence and shadows. Still, when the masked man finally spoke, his voice was calm in a way that made the jungle seem to listen. "You walk like a man who carries more questions than answers," the stranger said. Baku frowned. "I walk like a man who wants more from life," he replied. The masked man tilted his head slightly, as if considering the weight of that confession. They spoke for a long time beneath the tree, longer than Baku later remembered. The stranger asked about Kandoro, about its people, its beliefs, its stubborn attachment to balance and patience. Baku answered honestly, though his words carried a quiet bitterness. He spoke of effort that went unnoticed, of ambition restrained by old sayings, of a world that rewarded boldness while his village praised restraint. The masked man listened without interruption, and when Baku finally paused, the stranger said, "You believe the world owes you more because you have waited." Baku bristled at the words but did not deny them. The stranger continued, "Tell me, then, what would you trade to stop waiting?" Baku laughed softly. "Trade? I have nothing worth trading." The masked man's voice did not change. "Every man has something," he said. "Some trade their time, some trade their peace, some trade things they do not yet understand the value of." When the offer finally came, it did not arrive like a threat, but like a simple statement of fact. "I can make you wealthy," the masked man said. "Not briefly, not by chance, but in a way that changes how the world sees you." Baku felt his chest tighten. Wealth had been a distant dream, always discussed but never touched. "And what do you want in return?" he asked. The masked man's answer was quiet. "Your shadow." For a moment, Baku thought he had misheard. He laughed, the sound echoing strangely among the trees. "My shadow," he repeated. "You want darkness on the ground?" The masked man shook his head slowly. "A shadow is not just darkness," he said. "It is proof that light recognizes you. It is the mark of a conscience standing between you and the sun." Baku scoffed at the poetry of it. He had grown tired of metaphors and meanings. "Take it," he said dismissively. "If that is the price, then it is no price at all." The agreement was sealed without ceremony. There were no chants, no blood, no written words. The masked man stepped aside, allowing Baku to continue down the path. "By sunrise," he said, "you will have what you desire." Baku did not turn back to look at him. He walked home with quickened steps, his thoughts racing ahead to imagine futures, fields overflowing, voices speaking his name with admiration, a life finally large enough to match his ambition. He slept deeply that night, heavier than he had in months. When dawn arrived, sunlight poured into the compound as it always had, warm and familiar. Baku stepped outside and stretched, ready to greet the day that would change everything. It was then he noticed the ground beneath him. The earth was bright, the sun was high, but beside him, behind him, beneath him, there was nothing. His shadow was gone. His shadow was gone. Baku stood still, blinking under the morning sun, waiting for his eyes to adjust, for the familiar dark shape to slide back into place beside his feet. He shifted, stepped forward, lifted his arms, and turned slowly in a full circle. The light followed him faithfully, but the ground remained empty. For a brief moment, a cold unease touched his spine, but it passed quickly, smothered by the louder thought rising in his chest. It worked. The promise beneath the baobab tree had not been empty words. Whatever had been taken from him, something far greater was already moving toward him. By midday, the signs were impossible to ignore. His fields, which only days before had grown steadily but modestly, now bent under the weight of thick, healthy grain. Goats multiplied, tools stopped breaking, and buyers arrived without being summoned. News traveled faster than footsteps in Kandoro, and by evening, people stood at the edge of Baku's compound, whispering his name with a mix of admiration and confusion. Wealth, it seemed, had found him at last. In the days that followed, prosperity wrapped itself around Baku's life like a second skin. Traders sought his favor. Elders nodded at him with cautious respect. His home filled with goods that once existed only in his imagination. Yet alongside the praise came glances that lingered too long, conversations that quieted when he passed. Children, who once ran freely toward him, now hesitated. Some pointed, others hid behind their mother's legs. It was a boy, barely old enough to understand fear, who first spoke the truth aloud. "He has no shadow," the child whispered, his voice carrying farther than intended. The market fell silent. People looked down, then away. Baku laughed, louder than necessary, brushing it off as foolishness. "Shadows come and go with the light," he said. "Are we now afraid of the sun?" But even as he spoke, dogs growled low in their throats when he approached, and birds lifted suddenly from the ground as if startled by something unseen. Kandoro had always believed that animals noticed what humans ignored. At home, the change was harder to dismiss. Amara watched him closely, her eyes searching his face as though looking for someone who had stepped out of it. He brought her gifts, more than she had ever asked for, but she received them with polite distance. "You speak differently," she said one night as they sat together in silence. "Your words sound right, but they feel empty." Baku felt irritation rise within him. Had he not given her comfort, security, abundance? Was that not enough? His children sensed it too. They obeyed him, but without warmth. Laughter faded quickly when he entered a room. Baku noticed these things, but instead of questioning himself, he blamed them. "They will adjust," he told himself. "People always do when fortune changes hands." What he did not admit was that something inside him felt dull, as though a soft layer had formed between his thoughts and his feelings. He spoke often, but listened less. He smiled, but felt nothing move behind it. As weeks passed, the hollowness deepened. Lies slipped from Baku's mouth with unsettling ease. Promises meant little, words became tools instead of truths. When disputes arose, his decisions favored profit over fairness, and he felt no sting of guilt. The elders of Kandoro noticed his absence from gatherings, his disinterest in counsel. They spoke among themselves in low voices, repeating old sayings that had not been spoken aloud in years. "A man without a shadow walks alone, even in a crowd," one said. Another replied, "When conscience leaves, wealth speaks the loudest." Baku heard these whispers and dismissed them as jealousy. Yet at night, when sleep refused to come, he lay awake listening to the quiet of his house. The silence pressed against him, heavy and unmoving. Dreams came, but they brought no rest, only images of light without form, of footsteps that made no sound, of a sun that revealed nothing beneath it. The final fracture came not with loss, but with isolation. Invitations stopped. Greetings grew brief. The market no longer welcomed his presence, people traded quickly and turned away. Baku remained wealthy, but his world narrowed. One afternoon, standing alone in his fields, he watched the sun sink low and cast long shadows across the land. Everyone else's shadows stretched and shifted with the fading light, workers, trees, animals, each anchored by its dark twin. Baku stood among them like an omission, a space where something should have been. For the first time since the bargain, a quiet fear settled fully into his chest. Wealth had given him everything he thought he wanted, yet taken something he could no longer name. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Baku realized he had never felt so unseen. Not by others, but by himself. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Baku realized he had never felt so unseen, not by others, but by himself. Night settled over Kandoro with a familiar stillness, yet nothing about it felt familiar anymore. The sounds of evening, crickets, distant voices, the crackle of cooking fires, reached him as if from another world. Baku returned to his compound, but the space no longer welcomed him. His wealth had expanded the walls, yet the rooms felt smaller, tighter, as though closing in around him. Amara spoke less now, and when she did, her words carried no expectation of being heard. His children avoided his gaze, moving around him the way one moves around a stranger whose temper is unknown. Baku sat alone, surrounded by abundance, and felt a strange pressure behind his ribs, like a truth pushing outward with nowhere to go. Sleep no longer came easily. When it did, it brought dreams filled with harsh light and empty ground, of standing beneath a burning sun that refused to acknowledge his presence. Days turned into weeks, and the isolation hardened. Baku attempted to reclaim his standing the only way he knew how, through display. He gave public gifts, donated grain loudly, and spoke often of generosity. But his actions felt rehearsed, his kindness announced rather than lived. The villagers accepted what was offered, but gratitude never reached their eyes. Elders watched him with quiet sadness, not anger. That hurt more than open rejection ever could. Baku began to notice how people stepped slightly aside when he passed, how conversations bent away from him like grass under a careless foot. In the market, sellers no longer lingered. Deals were completed quickly, without warmth. warmth. Even the animals remained uneasy around him. Dogs barked from a distance, never approaching. Birds took flight when he drew near. Kandoro was not casting him out, but it was no longer holding him either. He existed on the edges of the life he once belonged to. At night, Baku's thoughts grew sharp and restless. He replayed moments from his past, elderly voices warning him, proverbs spoken patiently, his own laughter dismissing them. He remembered the strange hesitation of his shadow at sunset, the way it had seemed uncertain before vanishing. Now, memory pressed him from all sides. He stood before polished metal, water, anything that reflected light, hoping somehow to see proof of himself restored. But reflection offered only a man outlined by brightness, unfinished. One night, overwhelmed by the weight of it all, Baku left his house and walked toward the jungle again. He did not know why his feet chose that path, he only knew that staying felt unbearable. The trees received him in silence. Beneath the same baobab tree, he fell to his knees, wealth forgotten, pride stripped away. For the first time, Baku did not ask for more. He asked for relief. The masked man appeared without sound, as if he had always been there. He stood before Baku, unchanged, his presence calm and unhurried. Baku looked up, tears streaking his face, his voice breaking as he spoke. He offered everything, gold, land, status, words spilling out in desperation. Take it all, he begged. I will give back everything you gave me. Just return what you took. The masked man listened, unmoved, until the pleas quieted into silence. Then he spoke. What was taken was not stolen, he said. It was given. Baku lowered his head. Then teach me how to earn it back, he whispered. The masked man stepped closer. A shadow cannot be purchased, he said. It follows only those whose actions allow it. If you wish to walk with yours again, you must learn to live without being seen. The instructions were simple, yet heavy. Baku was told to help without recognition, to speak truth even when silence would protect him, and to choose fairness when no one was watching. He was warned that there would be no sign, no promise of when or if the shadow would return. Redemption, the masked man explained, was not a transaction. It was a direction. When Baku looked up again, the stranger was gone, leaving only the steady breath of the jungle and the weight of choice. Baku rose slowly and began the walk back to Kandoro, not with hope but with humility. For the first time in many seasons, his steps were not guided by desire, but by responsibility. The night did not feel lighter, but it felt honest. And somewhere beyond sight, beneath a sky indifferent to bargains, Baku took his first step toward becoming whole again. And somewhere beyond sight, beneath a sky indifferent to bargains, Baku took his first step toward becoming whole again. The days that followed did not change him quickly, nor did they reward him loudly. He returned to Kandoro without announcement and began living differently, though at first no one noticed. He rose before dawn, not to count his wealth, but to work beside those who labored unseen. He repaired broken tools without asking whose they were. He left grain at doorsteps before sunrise and walked away before thanks could find him. When disputes arose, he spoke the truth plainly, even when it cost him favor or profit. At the market, he paid fair prices and accepted losses without complaint. His voice grew quieter, but steadier. His movements slowed, not from weakness, but from care. There were days when nothing seemed to change, when the ground beneath him still held no shadow and the silence inside him felt heavy. Yet Baku did not turn back. For the first time in his life, he was not chasing an outcome. He was choosing a way of living, one small act at a time, without witnesses, without certainty. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Kandoro began to respond, not with praise, but with ease. People no longer stepped aside when Baku passed. Children stopped staring at the ground around his feet. Dogs no longer barked, but watched him quietly. Amara noticed the change before anyone else. She saw it in the way he listened without interruption, in the patience that returned to his hands, in the warmth that no longer felt forced. One evening, as they sat together in the fading light, she spoke softly. "You are here again," she said. Baku did not ask what she meant. He felt it too. Laughter returned, unplanned and real. The elders observed from a distance, saying nothing, as was their way. They had learned long ago that true change did not need applause. Months passed. The seasons shifted. Baku's wealth settled into balance, no longer multiplying wildly, but no longer hollow. And then, one ordinary morning, as the sun rose gently over Kandoro and stretched its light across the earth, Baku stepped outside and paused. There, beside him, faithful and quiet, his shadow rested on the ground. It did not announce itself. It simply returned. Baku did not shout or fall to his knees. He stood still, breathing, allowing the moment to pass through him without grasping it. The shadow moved when he moved, followed when he walked, stopped when he stopped. It asked for nothing. Kandoro noticed, of course. Whispers spread, then settled into acceptance. The elders nodded, satisfied. In time, Baku became known not as the man who lost his shadow, but as the man who learned how to carry it. He was never the richest in Kandoro again, and he never sought to be. But his presence carried weight. His words carried truth. And when the sun set each evening, casting long shapes across the red earth, Baku walked home with his shadow beside him, no longer a symbol of ambition, but a quiet reminder. In Kandoro, the elders still tell this story by firelight, ending it the same way every time: a man's shadow does not belong to his body alone. It belongs to his choices.